Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Steven Shalowitz. First, remind you that for over 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, and connecting high school and college students to Israel. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, do visit jnf.org. Once again, jnf.org. Plus, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe, rate, and review us. Give us a 5-star rating, of course, and do so wherever you get your podcasts. And we'd love it too if you shared the show with others as well. All right. Now, Israel's security, especially since October 7th, is absolutely paramount. One company working to keep Israel safe is Tel Aviv-based RealEye. It's an intelligence and security venture which has developed an advanced open source intelligence solution which looks to foil and intercept potential threats in the domain of homeland security in order to ensure public safety. Well, here to share RealEye's work and to talk about the use of such technologies, we're joined by RealEye's co-founder and CEO, Kevin Cohen. Now, RealEye is working with the Zvi Meitar Institute at Reichman University, which is headed by Professor Dov Greenbaum. He also joins us on this episode. And we'll have the bios of both gentlemen on the show notes page of this episode on our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. Let me tell you, these are two highly accomplished individuals indeed. And I look forward to our conversation, which begins right now as Kevin and Dov join us on the line via Zoom. Kevin is in Tel Aviv and Dov is in Zichron Yaakov, just south of Haifa. Welcome to you both. And I'd like to start with you, Kevin, actually, if you can first share the need you identified in establishing RealEye.
Well, I think on a high level, regardless of the specific use case or venue, we're looking at the value or the value proposition of being able to identify potential contradictions, inconsistencies, or red flags when individuals or subjects are submitting information, whether it's for the process of onboarding or application in the government space, whether it's in the domain of cross-border activity. The objective is to validate integrity and to add a more peripheral understanding of identity in terms of the story that's been submitted to us versus the actual evidence and facts underlined.
And so you're looking for those red flags, as you said, at its core. And then what exactly is the technology and how does it work? And we're going to be talking a little bit later on in our conversation about some of the people that you've identified and that you're really looking out for. So I want our listeners to stay tuned for that. But if you can just share a little bit about the technology and how does it really work?
So from an operational standpoint, you're looking to harness the capabilities of machine learning or artificial intelligence, a more commonly used term, to describe and identify threats and problems. You're using or implementing the capabilities of open source framework. Open source framework meaning open source intelligence. So in other words, we're not meddling or invading a subject's privacy or data. We're just scattering the information that we have readily available at the online web. And sort of within that framework, while simultaneously assessing feedback from hundreds of sources online, we can then gather the right input to determine whether or not a certain subject is indeed imposing a risk or some type of threat in the relevant in that relevant sphere or domain.
So it's open source and it's AI, so it's all out there. Dov, I want to bring you into the conversation. How did Reichman get involved with RealEye, and what is the role then of the Zvi Meitar Institute?
Sure, great. Thank you for asking. The Zvi Meitar Institute within Reichman University is an institute that broadly looks at the ethical, legal, and social implications of new and emerging technologies. And we have long been interested in areas associated with artificial intelligence, and particularly in the area of the use of open source intelligence for various sorts of use cases. And Kevin and I have known each other for some time, and we often work again with corporations, with universities and the like. And so it was great to connect with Kevin on this particular area. It provides a great learning opportunity for our students as well to learn about OSINT and to learn about some of the ethical, legal, and social implications of this technology and the uses that RealEye is employing.
I'm just really curious, Dov, in the Israeli context, what are some of the rules and regulations? Is this an evolving area, or is it somewhat established now?
Sure. Well, so there are privacy rules and regulations. The technicalities are perhaps too intricate to get into over here, but there are issues relating to privacy and the like. But more often than not, we're in sort of a sort of gray zone here, because as Kevin described, we're taking data that you, the user, has with full intent put online for the most part, and that data is being analyzed. So the question as to whether or not a user can come back and say my privacy has been sort of violated as a result of what I myself have done is a difficult question to answer and raises interesting ethical issues.
Interesting. So I want to go back to you, Kevin, because we talked at the very beginning of this conversation about the red flags. And so now I want to do a little bit of a deep dive into who are the types of people and the types of groups that you're really, really looking out for, because I don't think that our listeners have a real sense, I could be wrong, but they might not have a real sense of the dangers out there and all of these nefarious organizations out there in the web of these organizations that are trying to infiltrate into Israel and really infiltrate into Israel. And I do want to underscore that, right? And so I want you to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to kind of open up the floor to you, however you like to tackle that question.
Okay, cool. So in the relevant landscape of the type of threats that we're facing, aside the obvious militant dangers that we have, obviously associated with the conflict, there's the entire issue of the BDS-related movements that are all somehow intertwined together. They're not grassroots movements, as some people tend to percept. And there are over 170 organizations just in North America that are advocating in some way or another for the Palestinian cause or for the divestment away from Israel. Mm-hmm. So, focusing on perhaps on the sphere of cross-border activity, our objective would be to, on the back heel of not just everything that's happened post 7th of October, but also these audiences, the anti-Israel audiences that have been pushing this narrative of charging the moral high ground over everything that has to do with the Israeli and Palestinian conflict to promote their anti-Israel causes. What we're doing in that particular domain, we're wanting to understand, from the ones that are wanting to come into Israel or to the Palestinian authorities or to Gaza, we want to understand who is trying to come in and what type of intentions or objectives or motives they have in mind. There's numerous examples, but again, on a high level, I think for your listeners, it's imperative to understand that groups like Hamas or Hezbollah, for instance, have a vast international network of businesses and charity organizations and NGOs, and the money that's funneled, the resources that are funneled, and the efforts that's being put in place for 2 decades now is insane. So categorically, if you're looking at certain crowds that are wanting to come to Israel, and we want to look out for them, you would talk about perhaps individuals pretending to be agents or officials that are part of a humanitarian aid organization, or journalists from countries that are hostile, like Qatar or Turkey, that work for state-sponsored media organizations and are coming in under a facade of a journalist or an executive that works for a humanitarian aid organization or a medical aid organization or a human rights organization. And so under that facade, and obviously exploiting Israel being a democracy, exploiting our open door policy for tourists, they'll come in and then, we've seen time and again how they're manipulating and working the system to get their way, and using our system as a vehicle to come in and entertain relationships with Hamas and PLO executives, distribute disinformation. To say that, just to name a few, we can go over the various use cases, but the challenge is always there way before the 7th of October, and for a couple of decades now.
Yeah, and in a previous conversation, you made the distinction between those people that hate Israel and those people that want to do harm to Israel. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that, as well as another point that we had in a previous conversation where you pointed out that sometimes these people that are coming in through the auspices of a humanitarian organization, they might not know that they've been duped. And I'm wondering if you can address that as well. And then I'd like to hear actually about some individual and some specific cases.
Well, first of all, it's for people that don't have a basic peripheral understanding of the conflict, it's very easy to get dragged or carried along with a certain idea or a certain ideology, or some of these predominantly Europeans and some Americans have been coming to Israel with the objective of entering Gaza or parts of the Palestinian Authority, with a certain objective at heart that's perhaps genuine. A lot of these folks are missing the basic understanding of how things work in that part of the world. And so, Gaza is run like a Soviet police state. And if you're expressing dissent that doesn't fall in line with the narrative, of the objectives, or the coordinated effort of these factions, of the proxy apple of the tree called Iran, if your rhetoric or the type of stuff that you post on social media, or the type of conversations that you're going to have with locals, doesn't fall in line with the basic rhetoric or agenda of Hamas, they'll make your life miserable. So sometimes there would have been instances where these individuals are wanting to come into Israel, and their families, through the consulates or embassies of these countries, would reach out and say, hang on, we know there's a severe risk of security. Can you keep them away? Can you remove them? Can you send them back? So there have been several instances like that, but in a lot of cases, you're seeing journalists and humanitarian aid organizations, their representatives are coming in with the clear objective of doing one thing, while they're perhaps at the entrance or at the crossing, they'll say something else. And so our objective here is to simply streamline the process of understanding or resurfacing information that's perhaps been hidden, so we can give the full story and see if it doesn't check out, or just a mechanism of being able to enabling a good decision that needs to be made at the focal point of authority. We're not the ones.
Yeah, and then I want to, and before we get on to some specific cases that I know both of you want to weigh in with, back to you, Dov. It's rather like finding a needle in a haystack, isn't it?
It's probably even harder than finding a needle in a haystack. It's more like finding a needle in a needle stack. It's looking for the people that stand out, looking for indications from their online presence that would indicate that they present some sort of risk to the country. Keeping in mind that at least when they're at the border themselves, it's easy to misrepresent who you are to the border agent, who may or may not let you in. But I think what RealEye has been able to show is that it's much harder to misrepresent your entirety of your online presence to an artificial intelligence.
This is such a cautionary tale for everybody to really pay attention to what they're putting online, isn't it?
Definitely. I think if you think about a lot of sort of rules and regulations across the board, so things that we may have heard of, let's say the GDPR, they make a distinction between what we call sensitive information and perhaps non-sensitive information. And I think what RealEye has shown and what technology has shown is that there isn't any really concept of information that isn't sensitive. The ability of an AI computer to make connections between seemingly inconsequential data essentially shows that all of our data that we put online is actually consequential in some way or another.
To play devil's advocate here for a moment, much of the October 7th attack was just low tech. And I'm wondering, is there a push among terrorist organizations to go low tech, or for people that are wanting to engage with them so that they don't have an online presence?
I think, I can't speak for any terrorist organization myself, but I would think that regardless of what terror organizations are pushing one way or the other, whether we know it or not, we often have an online presence. Even if we just have likes on Facebook, even if someone else is mentioning our name, that creates an online presence. So oftentimes we will intentionally have an online presence, even for those people that issue social media and the like.
Yeah, interesting. All right. Well, listen, back to you, Kevin. I want you to share a few real concrete examples of people that either you've been looking out for or people that have been, I don't know what the right word is, I'll use the word nabbed as a result of RealEye or even similar type of technology.
Okay, sure. First of all, just to offer insight, because unequivocally, there's the position of Israel here in the situation, and we're always in a bind because the spotlight is always on Israel. I'll just dish out one or two use cases from abroad, so people can fetch sort of the larger narrative. We have, not sure if people are familiar with Sami Dun. Sami Dun is a very militant group. It's an international syndicate based in Canada with branches all around the world and in Europe. That's associated with the BDS, but they're more militant. So they've met with Hamas executives. They funneled money to Hamas. They seemingly act as militant group. The founder and executive of Sami Dun, Khalid Barkat, was just recently deported from Germany. Sami Dun being designated a terrorist organization, zero tolerance for that. So you can see immigration and interior officials are acting the way we would have acted in a similar predicament. There have been other instances in the US where you've had BDS activists deported from the US for promoting terrorist activity or not disclosing terrorist activity. But if you'd like to sort of pick up on various instances that are more relevant to the Israeli landscape, we can talk about various instances of individuals abusing their position to funnel money to Hamas. Specifically, a gentleman by the name of Mohammed Al-Halabi, a Palestinian Canadian director of World Vision. 2016, he was arrested by Israeli authorities while crossing in from Gaza, and he was initially accused of funneling over $17 million to Hamas over the course of 4 years. Not just that, but he was also effectively engaged in the business of scouting for weapons and equipment for Hamas operatives. The 300-mile tunnel system wasn't just built in one day. It took a lot of coordinated effort from various groups, a lot of resources. So all of this is somehow intertwined. Another example would be Wahid Borsh, a Palestinian-Canadian engineer. He worked for the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. He was also arrested in 2016 for funneling an undisclosed sum to the tune of millions of dollars to Hamas executives, again, to facilitate the construction of tunnels, military infrastructure. So these guys are quite literally weaponizing their positions to push not just an agenda or narrative. They're not just trying to convince people. Here, it's very clear what these guys are trying to do. They're effectively funneling these funds and resources to wage war against Israel.
Kevin, you just mentioned the person from World Vision. That's a Christian relief organization. And so my question to you is, where are they getting the money? Are they just wealthy themselves and it's coming from them, or are they raising the money? How does that work?
Very interesting question. So, a lot of these organizations, the charity organizations, are not even aware of the resources that are being funneled to certain places because on their charter, if you're looking at like the Tides Network, if you're looking at Open Society, Forest Network, the Rockefellers, these organizations, it's part of their mission statement to harness the resourcing for impoverished areas, for underprivileged societies, or people that have been affected by disasters and so forth. So a lot of this is being exploited and abused and manipulated through a certain discourse or under the guise of, let's aid for Gaza, aid for the Palestinians. There's just so many organizations, but all of this is intertwined.
And so RealEye wants to identify those types of individuals that would potentially be coming into Israel to say that, we are nabbing you, you are not allowed here. That's really what the conversation is with RealEye. Just tangentially, I don't know if you're able to answer this or not, but say, for example, like the Rockefeller Foundation or Tides, et cetera, are the boards of these organizations not really drilling down and saying, okay, you want to help the poor people of Gaza? Okay, we'll approve a check for $100 million. But are they even bothering to ask what that $100 million is going to?
Well, the answer is no. And also a lot of this, we're not going to get into the politics of it. But what I could say is that, there's just so many organizations, it's overwhelming, whether it's all these types of organizations are Legal for Palestine, Legal Aid for students that have been arrested in the encampments, other engaged organizations, Black and Palestinians, Mexican and Palestinian. I mean, the list just goes on. And this entire structure is all framed with the objective of sort of manipulating the actual motive and the objective or the final destination of these funds. And so, you're looking at the conglomerated effort of indoctrinating the youth or the students into believing that they're doing something righteous. That's the resources that they've been putting into these organizations. It's unreal. So the system is just so well aligned and sophisticated that it'll be pointless for some of these charity groups to try and even trace back, or you've used the term needle in a haystack. It'll be a pointless effort for them to even try and track the traces of some of these resources, of how they've been allocated and where the money's been funneled to, and so some of these groups have political considerations or aspirations or objectives as well. So, I mean, we're not going to delve into that, but the bottom line is that the resources are either directly being harnessed to support militants and operatives, or in most cases to induce and encourage or strengthen that entire ecosystem that looks to promote anti-Israel causes. What you've seen after the 7th of October, these anti-Israel audiences, they were already appeased, but the objective is to satisfy perhaps the cause of, broadening the crowds or the audience and applying more pressure on governments, on businesses, on municipalities, all for the same root cause of divesting from Israel.
Yeah, and I just want to underscore something that we said earlier, is that what we see on college campuses, I want to ask you both about your thoughts on college campuses, but I mean, these are not grassroots efforts. These are very well-funded efforts, and we need to underscore that. I mean, when you look at, for example, all of those tents that are coming from one place, or all of those signs with all of the fonts on them, I mean, in the paper quality, et cetera, those are all coming from a central source. And that's something that really needs to be underscored. Well, Dov, Kevin was really talking about the whole money trail. And Nitzana Darshan-Leitner, whom we had here on the program from Shurat Hadin, well, that's been her life work. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that money trail and Shurat Hadin's work in this space.
Well, I think, perhaps one of the best areas where Shurat Hadin has really shown in this space is in the area of Omar Shakir, who was, after extensive sort of efforts, finally deported with the help of Shurat Hadin, and where eventually the Israeli Supreme Court had to step in and essentially say that no one has a right to be in Israel, and no one has a right to enter Israel. And so, keeping in mind what RealEye is doing, it's actually interesting because ultimately, the PR fallout of deporting someone is huge in relation to whatever PR fallout there is in terms of just not letting someone in, not giving them entry into the country. And so, the ability to keep someone out rather than to kick them out is something that should be applauded, and we should sort of promote those sorts of technologies that allow that.
You talked about Israel vis-a-vis rules and regulations of AI, and I'm just wondering, I'm not a tech guy, by the way, so I don't know how to ask this question, so bear with me, but AI technology, does Israel share it with other countries? Do other countries offer what they have with Israel? How does any sort of collaboration work, if at all?
So AI technology gets shared through academic sort of vehicles and the like, and through papers and the like, and through patents and the like. So oftentimes AI technology is shared across countries. An interesting aspect that perhaps, given that you're not a tech guy, but I'll mention it anyways, is the area of quantum computing, which is sort of unrelated to AI, but sort of the next sort of level of sort of analysis for some areas of computing. And in that space, we see where people are withholding sort of the ability to share that information. They're not patenting their things. They're not sharing that because they see that as very valuable. Nevertheless, people have commented on various corporations that do share their very powerful AIs. I won't mention any of the corporations here, but there have been some sort of indications that sharing isn't always the greatest thing to do when you're creating a very sort of powerful technology, because it's very easy for software to fall into the wrong hands.
Yeah, that's where I was going with that. Indeed. So, Dov, and then I want to hear from you, Kevin. Same question. So start thinking of an answer. Dov, I mean, you're working at Reichman University. You're intimately involved with students. And so when you're seeing what's happened on campuses here in the United States, what goes through your mind?
So I should be, in full disclosure, I'm a lecturer on a campus, a Ivy League university, stateside. And so when I see these sorts of sort of encampments and the like, I think a lot of what is clear is what you mentioned, and that is that these are not grassroots sort of efforts. These are well coordinated efforts. You mentioned the same thing that the head of the NYPD mentioned, which was that there's clearly a coordination in the tents, right? Just looking at seeing all the tents that look exactly the same. It's not like everyone clicked on Amazon and found the cheapest tents. There's clear coordination in that space. Who's coordinating and where the money's coming from is a long-term effort, and hopefully that will be sussed out at one point. But what I do see is a rise in anti-Semitism on campus and a rise in anger on campus, and I see this as sort of not sort of leaving once this whole war is over. I see this as perhaps, we're talking a lot about social media and the like, and I think a lot of people particularly perhaps the younger generation, sort of the digital generation that is starting to blur the distinction between being online and being in reality, in the sense that there is a sense of anonymity online, and people can say whatever they want online without fear, sort of any sort of repercussions, provided that they stay anonymous. And I think, a lot of the quiet things that they're saying in their heads to themselves and that they've been saying online and anonymously online, they now see some sort of ability to say these things out loud in sort of these encampments and the like. And so you're seeing a lot of overt anti-Semitism that would have otherwise not have been mentioned. And outside of the radical online environments being sort of spewed by people who you would think wouldn't actually say these types of things. I know this is perhaps a little off topic, but I think another sort of reason that we're seeing a lot of this anti-Semitism is I think students, for whatever reason, believe that they can hide behind sort of the moniker of Zionism. So they can, instead of saying the Jewish person or Israel, they can say the Zionists. But essentially, I think more often than not, what they mean are Jews. But they feel somewhat distanced from that anti-Semitism by calling them Zionists.
Have you had conversations within your American university where you're a lecturer with faculty administrators about this?
I have. And I think, to some degree, it probably depends on the university. Some universities deal with these issues for better or for worse, but I can say that I have been, and I have lectured on these campuses with my kippah on, and I haven't experienced any of the anti-Semitism myself.
Since October 7th?
Since October 7th.
Wow, that's surprising. That's very surprising. And then over to you, Kevin, what has gone through your mind when you've seen what's been unfolding on college campuses? And let me expand that also on the streets, because we can tell that you are a native English speaker and have spent time in the UK. And so when you see what's happening on the streets of London, for example, every Saturday, and on college campuses in the UK and in Europe, in the United States, what are some of your thoughts?
Well, I think the heart goes out to the members of the Jewish community, but I think that if to perhaps analyze what we're seeing from the standpoint of the current craft that we're dealing with in the spectrum of intelligence, we're seeing the fruits of labor that's been put in place by these organizations, the BDS-related movements, and organizations that have been working tirelessly in the academia for decades. And now we're seeing, it's not just resurfacing now, but as we mentioned previously, the 7th of October has pushed the narrative of sort of charging the moral high ground and taking ownership of the ideals of what's right and wrong in their favor, in the favor of Hamas. I mean, this is just music to their ears, what's happening in these campuses. But this is, again, just a vehicle. I mean, this too shall pass in a sense where, the voices may not be as loud, and the youthful rage or the militants that are joining them in these encampments, I mean, we're going to see enforcement pushing back. We're going to see other conservative voices perhaps pushing back. But I think what's and back to the point that Dov was bringing up, I think what's really concerning and distressing is the fact that the cyber bullies, or the bullies behind the keyboard, are now feeling comfortable enough in the evident reality of online campuses, or and posing a threat to the not just the safety of basically the emotional or existential well-being of their Jewish fellows. So there's been a line that's been breached, and I don't see that being turned around. I just see that being intensified. But from the standpoint of living in Israel, what we're facing, we're seeing a lot of these snowflakes coming into Israel with delusional ideas about the nature of the conflict and the evident reality of how things work in the real world. Israel's democracy, we're very much aligned with a lot of the basic principles that America supports. But if you're crossing the border to the Palestinian Authority or to Gaza, it's a whole different ballgame. And so, we're seeing more of that. A lot of Palestinian American students wanting to visit family members, or again, sometimes for the right reasons, but missing out on the actual reality of things. And so they're taking their life in these Western societies as they're given as granted, not really understanding the basic, the basic rules of engagement of how things work here.
Yeah, I mean, because to the point that we raised earlier, at least from RealEye's mission, is that you are looking for people that want to hurt Israel versus those that just hate Israel, right? Because you could potentially have someone come in that wants to visit their grandmother in Ramallah, for example, that isn't a fan of Israel, but they're not there to create any kind of harm.
That's a very good point. I'm glad you brought it up, because it's okay to have an opinion.
Yeah.
We can celebrate the difference. Part of the reason where things have intensified so bad is because, if you're looking at the social media as an instrument of control, there's no conversation, there's no dialogue, there's just shouting and canceling each other out.
It's one way.
So in line with what you've just asked, just to reflect on that, it's okay to have an opinion. And if you're not vouching for Israel or for the statehood of Israel, that's fine. But as a jurisdiction, in terms of, if you're talking about harnessing the basic civic measures of homeland security and safety for the Jewish people who live in Israel, regardless of their orientation or religion or political aspirations, if you're wanting to come into Israel, we have every bearing right to advocate for the various sensitivities that perhaps could bother us, like any other country. So if you want to come into Israel, okay, that's your opinion, fair enough. None of our business. What are you going to do with that? Do you have family members that are involved with the conflict, that are perhaps on a certain terror watch list? Are you looking to aid with intelligence, with information, with other instruments? I mean, here, I'll give you an example. Recently, you've had George Clooney's spouse, Amal Clooney, advocating. She's been advocating against Israel systemically for years now, year in and year out. But come to find out, she's the niece of a senior Hezbollah operative. So let's just theorize here. If she's trying to come into Israel, and we're keeping for our own safety or security, perhaps in some instances, we're keeping her from coming in. They'll again, Israel's in a bind. We're gonna be called all sorts of stuff. But then again, if you're coming into Gaza to meet with Hamas executives and you're a family member of, one of the senior executives of terrorist organizations, what are you? And what would you expect if the shoe was on the other foot? In other words, if you were talking about a domestic issue that relates to the security and safety of a European nation, of a member state of the European Union, or of America, if somebody's trying to come in and they're fiercely advocating for objectives that derail away from the basic principles of democracy, or the basic principles of freedom, or the basic principles that make an element of the basic foundation of the country that they're trying to visit. These are sensitive. In Israel, everything is case sensitive, but categorically, if you're a guest and you're coming in, if your interests don't align with the best interest of the country that you're coming into, we have every right to better understand the predicament all the way across the board. And I think that's just common practice and common sense. That being said, you have an opinion, come in, no problem. If you're looking to effectively undermine or diminish the state of security or safety of the people of Israel, and you're just a tourist, That's unacceptable. And I think that should be a bipartisan issue in any country. So,
You've raised so
but again,
many, you've really raised so many fascinating questions. And by the way, I wonder if Amal Clooney has ever been to Israel. Do you know if she's been?
I doubt it.
Yeah, I don't know, but I should probably check. You've raised really so many interesting questions. As we wind down our conversation, though, Dov, unrelated to this, I'm just really curious. TikTok, do you think that the US should ban the app?
Sure. Well, before I get there, I just want to maybe just quickly add to what Kevin was saying in terms of the allowance of free thought and free
Hmm.
speech, even free speech and thought that we don't agree with. Um, it's notable, if not ironic, that many of these people associated with these encampments that we were talking about earlier were also sort of the people that were pursuing the concept of microaggressions and safe spaces and speech as violence only years ago. And now, sort of, to use Kevin's sort of analogy, the shoe is on the other foot, and the concept of microaggression and speech as violence has all sort of, disappeared on university campuses. But with regard to TikTok, yes, I mean, there's been a really interesting study that looks at how TikTok is actually being, you would think there's an algorithm and it's sort of devoid of any sort of human interaction. But what it seems to be from some recent studies suggests that that if you look, there is a comparison of terms that may be used on, let's say, Meta, and then you can see how often a term may be used on Meta compared to how often that term may be used on TikTok. And what you see are terms that tend to be anti-Israel sort of break that sort of ratio and are much more prevalent on a platform like TikTok than on a platform like Meta. And the bottom line here is that TikTok clearly is or not clearly, but seems to be a tool of the state, not our state, but a tool of the
China.
state of China that sort of seems to be clearly manipulating what people are seeing for the detriment of Israel and perhaps for the detriment of other countries as well, and for whatever China sees to be its purpose in manipulating the information. And again, this isn't my sort of understanding of it. These are studies that have sort of shown that this is what TikTok is actively doing, is it's manipulating access to information. And unfortunately, we live in we're with generations that the source of their information is social media and is TikTok. And without the ability to control that source of information, we are definitely at a disadvantage. And I think what the U.S. Congress is doing, there are issues of free speech, there are issues of access to information, and there are sort of countervailing sort of concerns. But ultimately, if it can be shown and proven that TikTok is actually a tool of China being purposefully used to misinform the American public, then yes, I think we need to find a way to curtail the uses of TikTok.
Yeah,
And this isn't.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, please go.
No, I was going to say, because as it relates to Israel's war with Gaza, I don't think the Chinese, and I come from a China background, I don't think the Chinese are inherently anti-Semitic or hate Jews, but I think that they look at this issue, the Israel-Gaza war, is a huge issue that has divided the United States, and it's their objective to divide the United States even further. So they've latched on to this war. That's really what it is.
Definitely.
And it was also the BLM movement, for example. And after this, there's going to be another movement, and they're going to latch onto that as well, just to divide the United States, because that's really what their objective is.
China is aligned closely with Iran and with Russia.
Yeah.
And so there are indications that, they may not have a clear sort of interest in it, but they have an interest with regard to who they're aligned with to be anti-Israel.
Absolutely. Yes, Kevin?
Just want to to complement what Dov said and what you've said previously. China and Russia are definitely feeding off the turbulence and chaos that's taking place on campuses. They're feeding off that entire discourse of things. And the way China operates online, they'll wage war on you without firing a single bullet. So social stability or social consistency is could be described as your enemy, as a nemesis. And by enabling this process and seeing how this also reflects on what's happening with the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, it's a great litmus test for them to see how things are getting very quickly escalating to drastic measures and chaotic measures with the gentle push. That's an understatement. Being able to sort of cultivate that type of conversation online, if you can call it a conversation. A recent study just claimed that 80% of the accounts on Twitter are bots. You know, there's other examples on TikTok and Instagram and other social media outlets, but this is both the Russian and Chinese regimes are definitely feeding off what's happening between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and also, you know, what they're seeing on college campuses is a direct result of a lot of work that's being put in place on social media.
All right. And on that note, we're going to leave it right there. Kevin Cohen, Dov Greenbaum, this has been such a fascinating conversation. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode of IsraelCast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
All right. And for more on Kevin and Dov and RealEye and this conversation, do visit the show notes page of our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. And of course, we do release new episodes of the show every other Wednesday. We're going to have some bonus episodes as well, so do look out for those. And just so you never miss an episode, don't know why you would want to do that, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. Simply search for IsraelCast. It's so easy. And don't forget to rate and review us, because that really helps with our rankings, which in turn make it easier for more people around the world to find us. Or you can always enjoy the show by visiting us at our website. Once again, it's jnf.org/IsraelCast. Now, it takes a whole moshav to put IsraelCast together. For that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Dara Shapiro, J.D. Krebs, and Ellie Kadrin. Our editors are Jay Rothman and James Casada from Miratone Studios right here in the very heart of New York City. And the music that you hear at the top until the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. IsraelCast is powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. For more info about JNF USA, do visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas or just to say hello, I know Kevin and Dov would love to hear from you, and so would I. So do email us at israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Steven Shalowitz. Thanking you for tuning in and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.